regulations that require certain levels of investment in order for something to happen. We generally, in terms of, and I'm talking in a very like strict legal sense, from a land use standpoint, we're able to do far more draconian things than culturally we're willing to do. I'm not suggesting we should be willing to do those things, but I think it's important to realize that that statement's not true. We can't say no. You actually can say no to like almost everything that we say yes to today. But that having been said, culturally, what can we do? We understand that that transaction is a net negative for us. It gives us this immediate sugar rush of cash, but over the long term, it's bankrupting us. So what do? To me, my approach is simple. I don't have a problem if the free market wants to do that, if the private market wants to do that. But I say the public will not take over that obligation unless it makes sense for the public to do so. And so if you want to build that and you want to have a private road and private utilities and private systems, I'm perfectly fine with that. But the public will not take on that obligation unless it financially makes sense. It's interesting because the cost of schooling is different. You really have to look at schooling kind of in two dimensions. The first is that, a student is a student is a student. If the student lives out in the middle of nowhere or right next to the school, in terms of once the student's in the school, it doesn't cost the school any different. It's the same. What is different is the transportation costs. And what you often see schools doing, because schools create all these fixed costs for themselves, by where they locate their buildings, et cetera. And then what they do is they wind up taking money out of the classroom and using it for busing. And the ones that get really desperate start to do things like they'll say, okay, within a mile of school, we won't bus you. And then it's within 2 miles of school, we won't bus you. What you're doing as a school is you're creating a cost structure that says to that farmer and that developer and the people that would buy those properties, go ahead and buy that, don't worry about the cost, we'll tax someone else to make up that difference. That's not what my approach would be. My approach would be to say, okay, if you live within walking distance of the school, a mile or whatever it is, we'll make sure you have a good walk to that school. If you live within 2 miles or 3 miles, we're going to pick you up because it's really convenient to do. If you live outside of that, we'll have a bus route that goes around and makes stops at certain places, and you could pay extra if you want us to pick you up at those stops, just like a regular transit bus service would be. But we're not going to give you door-to-door delivery if you choose to live in a place that's in the middle of nowhere. Now, school districts have a hard time doing that, and I don't know what your open enrollment situation is or how your school districts, if they're competitive or not. But I've seen school districts that are willing to drive like an hour and a half out to the middle of nowhere to pick up one kid because the formula gives them an extra $6,500 a year for that kid, even though they might spend $3,000 a year busing them. That's a net increase. And it's a net increase because schools have such high fixed costs that there's a huge incentive for every new student you can add. I think we've messed up our school finances primarily by consolidating. That's a conversation for like another 2-hour speech. But to me, I think you need to think a little bit broader than the mental constraints of, well, the school has to do this. The school has a lot of flexibility. Please. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Well, and I think it's important. Some neighborhood groups like, oh, we're going to get together and have a picnic. That's great. We're going to get together and have a barbecue. Wonderful. If the barbecue involves people like, I'm looking to see if we have any kids here. If the barbecue has a bunch of people bitching about, they're like, oh, look at that junky lot. The barbecue should devolve then into going and getting a rake and cleaning that up. That's a really effective neighborhood organization. And really, when the neighborhood organization starts to do that, they not only gain credibility, when they do make a demand like, hey, city, we need this or we need that, but they start to inspire others around them too. And to me, that's like the most positive thing you can do. And any of us can do it. we're out of time. One more question, please. Yeah. Right. Right. Sure. Wow. Now, guys, I'm a Gen Xer, so there's this natural tension there. You know, I do think that one of the things we have culturally, and if you think of it as like a military commander taking a hill, and everybody gets together and we charge up the hill, and it's really difficult. We fight this battle, we repel the enemy, and now we've got the hill. But it's like strategically very vulnerable. It's not very sound. We can't hold it. But we pour like every last soldier we have, every last munition we have into defending this hill instead of just like going back to the other hill that's like really defensible. What we've done is we've taken that hill. We've built this. We've created this system. We've established this standard of living. And the idea of like stepping back from that, of contracting, is so abhorrent and painful to us that we try to avoid it at all costs. What you see, you know, to me, is a natural human reaction, less of a generational reaction. You know, more of a, okay, here's where we've kind of marked our prosperity, and the idea of, you know, we'll slowly slip away from it. But the idea of an earthquake that would send us here is you know, or consciously deciding to go to here is just too jarring to consider. And, you know, to me, that's a human quality. I would love to blame the baby boomers because I find them, you know, I loathe them in many ways. Just kidding. I've learned to tolerate baby boomers. But, yeah, I think you're really, you know, describing a human emotion. And understand, you know, I sometimes get accused of nostalgizing you know, my ancestors from 100 years ago, right? Thinking that they were wonderful. They were a bunch of, you know, illiterate, prejudiced, whatever. These were not great people, and they were not living in great places, and it was not utopia. They were selfish. They had every motive that we do today. What they had, though, was a framework for building that harmonized a lot of those things. So if you know, look at the traditional development pattern, you look at a building that you would build in that old picture of my hometown. When you went out and built it, if you were going to be selfish, like, I want to make this the most valuable thing for me, what would you have done? You would have built it right up to the street line. You would have lined it up with everyone else. You would have framed the building across the street. You would have had good symmetry. You would have had a building that, in your own self-interest, tied into everything else, because that's how you made the building the most valuable. So the traditional development pattern, what it did, and realize that this is an evolutionary process, trial and error of thousands of years, it optimized the human condition so that we could be selfish and look after ourselves, and the ability, or someone looking after themselves in that framework also benefited the whole, okay? So what was good for one was good for all. That's what that framework did. If you look today at those same places, you look at the Taco John's, you know, what is in the best interest of the Taco John's? Well, tear down the building, put in a parking lot, put up the biggest, most obnoxious sign that you can to get people off the street. You know, your future and your self-interest on that property is completely divorced from everyone around you. And in fact, in many ways is antithetical to what's going on around you. So we've replaced a operating system for our cities and our lives that was optimized socially, culturally, politically, and financially with an operating system for our cities based on theories that, while good in intention, have really wreaked havoc on all of those things. And to me, if there's one like big takeaway, that's it. So happy day, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for attending. If you are, and Chuck for the thought-provoking presentation and allowing us to, for a few moments, to really challenge our thoughts and perspectives and ideas. And I hope you take some of this as a takeaway out there in your communities and neighborhoods. You know, if you're a professional engineer, AICP, or architect, and that, please sign up in the back for your professional credit hours. But thank you all for being here tonight, and we appreciate it all very much. And we hope we can on our email list, and we can tell you about the next conversation that we'll have in the next couple of months. So, thank you again. Good night.